Ireland Awake broadcasting to the world, bringing you the latest updates on Irish views, Irish news and Irish identity.
Welcome to the International Service of Ireland Awake, broadcasting to the nation, to the diaspora and to the world from Dublin. Analysis is brought to you by the team at Ireland Awake Broadcast and Media. Recently, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar announced that there will be an inquiry into the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. That inquiry will have terms of references, but those terms of references have not yet been disclosed. However, what Taoiseach had to say is very interesting. He mentioned firstly that there will be no finger pointing in this particular inquiry that's scheduled to take place this year, 2023. And secondly, that it's not about ascribing blame. Now, Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach, said that there will be a comprehensive evaluation of all that happened during the COVID times, but that it will not involve health chiefs being called as witnesses. What sort of an inquiry is this? What sort of evidence will be taken? What confidence can you possibly have in an inquiry where the chief architects of what happened are not being called to account, where the chief architects of what happened are not being called as witnesses, and where there will be no attempt to ascribe blame? I mean, what learning can possibly come from that sort of an inquiry? Is this an inquiry or is this simply a whitewash? And if it is a whitewash, why? Who is to gain? The investigative team here at Ireland Awake demand that certain things be investigated into. For example, it is fair and reasonable to ask why there was such a catastrophe in nursing homes, why people were discharged from hospital directly into nursing homes without any form of testing or any form of clinical evaluation to determine whether or not they had COVID or were showing any signs of upper respiratory or lower respiratory tract infections. There was none of that. Basic public health medicine that goes back to the Victorian era would have demanded that people being discharged into vulnerable communities such as in nursing homes would be tested or evaluated clinically at least before being discharged into that kind of a vulnerable environment. But that was not done. A decision was taken to discharge patients from hospital without any form of evaluation into the vulnerable environment of a nursing home, and the results were woefully predictable. There was a catastrophic loss of life in nursing homes because of that. The government or those in authority or NPHET, the National Public Health Advisory Committee, they willfully ignored the advice of what's known as the Great Barrington Declaration. The Great Barrington Declaration came out around March 2020 when a number of experts, public health experts, sat together in the town of Great Barrington in the United States and issued certain proposals which more or less said that with this upper respiratory tract infection, you must protect the vulnerable and then you may open society. We did the direct opposite. We closed society and we failed to protect the vulnerable, and the team at Ireland Awake demand to know why that happened, whose decisions were responsible for that catastrophe having occurred, such a predictable catastrophe that it strikes at the very foundations of normal, ordinary public health medicine. The normal rules and regulations were avoided, and people were discharged directly from nursing homes, directly from hospitals into nursing homes with predictable results. There is a need for that inquiry to determine who made those decisions, why those decisions were made, what brakes were put on those decisions, what evaluation took place for that decision. So that is one of the most important things that needs to be investigated into, not whitewashed over. And of course, then there was the whole matter of correspondence, email traffic between the Bird Group in the United Kingdom, that's the British Ivermectin Research Development Group in the United Kingdom, and the best advice they were giving HIQA and NPHET are two agencies responsible for advising government on all things pertaining to COVID. They were advised about the wise use of ivermectin, the value of ivermectin as a therapy for both prophylaxis and treatment. And that advice was completely and totally ignored by people who did not have the correct qualifications for making decisions of that nature. Again, that needs to be inquired into, that needs to be looked at, the precise chain of events that allowed catastrophic decisions of this nature to be made. We also need a full audit. A full audit needs to be made of delayed diagnoses and failed diagnoses, particularly for cancers and cardiovascular illness as a result of the delays because of COVID lockdowns and people being disinclined to visit their GP. The Irish Cancer Society, as early as the month of May 2020, a few months into the COVID pandemic, stated that there was a huge decrease in e-referrals from GPs to various cancer clinics, and massive decreases in skin cancer referrals, in prostate cancer referrals, in breast cancer referrals, and in suspected carcinoma of the colon. These e-referrals were reduced significantly as a result of the management of COVID, where everything was focused on one disease only, everything else lost out. This needs to be audited, and the simple question needs to be answered: did lockdowns cost lives as opposed to save lives? Again, that needs to be looked at by a competent investigative team and not through a whitewash. Also, and very, very importantly, perhaps most importantly, the whole concept of vested interest needs to be looked at. There was no declaration of vested interest from anybody advising the government, for people on NPHET or from the expert advisory committee in HIQA that advised NPHET, that advised the government. But because the same names and faces occurred in both the expert advisory committee and HIQA, it seems to me to be wheels that go round and round. And the question must be asked: where was the vested interest, and whose best interest were these decisions made? An inquiry must ask that and must come to robust decision making on whose best interests were decisions made. Were those decisions made in the best interest of somebody with a financial benefit in HIQA or in any of the other related organisations? Or were those best interests made in your best interest and my best interest? I think not. But there is a need for an inquiry to investigate that robustly and plainly if blame is not going to be ascribed, and plainly if fingers won't be pointed, and plainly if this inquiry will not involve health chiefs being called to give evidence. How can anybody have any confidence in that sort of an inquiry? Get to the root of why decisions were made that now we know are so disastrous. All the eggs were in one basket, the vaccine basket, to the total exclusion of everything else. All the focus was on COVID, the COVID basket, to the total exclusion of every other disease. All the management of COVID revolved around lockdowns and vaccination, and the management of the disease in this particular way as opposed to the prophylactic use of ivermectin. Why was that? Decisions were made, but those decisions need to be inquired into. And the investigative team at Ireland Awake wants to know, will there be a full declaration of vested interest, needs to know what exactly the chain of command was that brought about decisions that were so absolutely disastrous. We want to know as well, and this is very, very important, why 21,000 doctors registered with the Medical Council were bullied into silence, threatened with their loss of livelihood, if they spoke out in any way deviating from the official narrative. 21,000 doctors remained silent. A handful of honourable doctors spoke up, and for the most part they've been investigated and now run the risk of loss of livelihood through their courageous defending of the best interests of their patients. The Medical Council, all 23 members, they too have never declared their vested interest. They too have never declared how their decision-making came about. They have never, to the best of the knowledge of anybody here at Ireland Awake, declared where their vested interest, if any, lies. And we want to be very clear about this at Ireland Awake. We want to be extremely clear about this, that if it is shown that patients died because of decisions made to bring financial benefit to certain people as opposed to health benefits to those in need, that should be criminally investigated and criminally prosecuted if evidence is shown that vested interests led to decision makings that led to death of people. We need to know that. And again, a robust inquiry will have no difficulty in unravelling if that happened. But again, we've been told by An Taoiseach Leo Varadkar that blame, it is not about ascribing blame. It ought to be about ascribing blame so that we know going into the future where the mistakes were made in the past. This is all the hallmarks, this COVID-19 inquiry, of nothing more than an unreliable whitewash. Decisions will be made that will have no material advantage going forward, that will have no preventative role in this occurring again, and the chief architects will walk free without any form of accountability. At Ireland Awake, the investigative team are calling for accountability. We are calling for people to be held to account robustly and publicly and investigated in a transparent and meaningful way. As in all inquiries, why should this particular inquiry, where so many lives have been lost, where the economy has been wrecked, where mental health has for many people been detrimentally affected as a result of the draconian legislations and policies brought in? There is a need for this to be investigated thoroughly and people held to account for the decisions made and those decisions explained so that the mistakes of the past will never be made going into the future. But alas, that is not going to occur, according to An Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, where blame will not be ascribed. In Ireland Awake, we are calling for a transparent, robust inquiry. We're calling for accountability, and we are calling for full, open, honest transparency. Thank you.